2019 was one of the greatest years in recent history for roller coasters. We saw the opening rides like Copperhead Strike, Dueling Dragons, Hagrid's Magical Creatures Mudbike Adventure, Hokage, Steel Curtain, Taiga, TMNT Shellraiser, Untamed, and Zadra. In addition to that, you had the first SNS air launch coaster to open in the United States since 2004, Maxx Force. It would break a number of records such as the world's fastest airtime hill, world's highest double inversion, and most importantly, it opened with the quickest launch in North America, going from 0 to 78 miles per hour in 1.8 seconds. This topped the previous record of accelerator and knots. It goes from 0 to 82 in 2.3 seconds. The top speed on Max is lower, but the acceleration is still quicker. But despite being such a big investment, I still don't think that Maxx Force is getting all the praise it deserves. That, however, does not mean that it's a perfect ride, as no ride really is, so today we'll be going over the positives and negatives of Maxx Force. In order to end the video on a high note, I'm going to start out with the negatives. First of all, they had to take out one of the park's most historic structures in order to make room for the coaster. Before Maxx Force's there was a Pictorium. It originally opened in 1979 with the largest IMAX screens in the world, and back in 1979, Marriott's Great America was more about the whole family experience and less about the rides. I mean, back then they only had 3 coasters, so there had to be other things to do. Now that the park has 15 coasters, not as many people are going to be taking time out to go to the theater. Taking the Pictorium out makes sense, but it's just sad because of how historic the structure was. The next negative isn't really the fall of the park, it's just going to be the case with any new major coaster at a major park, and that's that Maxx Force can have some pretty long queue times. When I was there, Maxx Force had the second longest wait all day at 1 hour and 30 minutes, and it was a weekday too, and the lines won't even be shorter at the very start of the day when the park opens because it's right at the front of the park. People just walk in and it's the first thing there, so they go to it. Again, it's not the fall of the park or anything or like a problem that can be fixed, but that doesn't mean the queue times aren't annoying. About the actual ride though, it does hold the record for the world's fastest airtime hill, but if I'm being honest, that airtime hill doesn't really give any airtime. It's a little too short and drawn out too. And overall, the ride doesn't really have any airtime, maybe unlike some other SNS air launch coasters, so don't go in expecting any. Another thing is that if we go back to the launch that precedes the airtime hill, you might notice that there isn't really any theming or sound effects on the launch. And I think that's the reason why, even though I think this launch is more powerful, Top Thrill Dragster still has my favorite launch. However, not having any theming or sound effects does create one major pro for first time riders, and I will talk about that later. I don't really have anything negative to say about the actual layout after the first airtime hill, besides the fact that when you get to the very end of the ride, it kind of pulls a full throttle by starting the brakes before the coaster is entirely over. I could see this being a big downside for some people, but it actually does to me once again create a positive that we'll get into later. And finally, probably the biggest flaw of Maxx Force is that it is quite a short ride. It's really just 4 main elements: the launch, dog tongue, zero G-roll, and max dive loop. Yes, that is the name of the final double inversion element. Of course, I wish the ride could be longer and maybe incorporate a few more airtime hills in a second half that weaves back around the ride, but Six Flags had to keep to that $15 million budget. And now it's time for the pros, but before we get into that, it's halftime trivia time. How this will work is I will ask a trivia question. The first 3 people to correctly answer in the comments below will get a shout out on my next major video. Today's question will be about Maxx Force, and the question is, who was the lead designer of Maxx Force, and which 2 companies does he design coasters for? A bit of a tougher question today, but I think that there will be some people that know it. Just answer in the comments and good luck. Now let's get back to the video where we will be moving on to the positives of Maxx Force, and I'm quite sure this section will be a lot longer than the first section of the video. Let's start off with Maxx Force's appearance, and this is one of the most unique looking coasters out there, or at least one of the most unique looking I've seen, and yes, that is a good thing because it helps to differentiate the skyline of Six Flags Great America and make it stand out against other skylines. I mean, take that dog tongue, that's the only element of its kind in the world, and all I could think about when I was looking at it was demented cobra roll. It's like if Arrow and Toga decide to partner up to build a cobra roll element, the transitions just look so jacked up, yet it tracks completely smoothly through it. Elements like this just make it the perfect ride to have right at the front of your park because of how menacing it looks. People know what they're in for when they walk into Great America. And also, since they went with a white color scheme, the paint fading won't be too bad over time. When you actually walk up to the ride, they have this cool looking entrance that also uses the same format and pays homage to the old Pictorium. It also stands out and makes it very obvious where you need to go to get onto the ride. Maybe unlike some other coasters at the park, I am looking directly at you, American Eagle. Also next to the entrance, you have a merch store that might just be the best place in the park to get some merch. They didn't just have Maxx Force stuff, but also cool designs from things all over the park, and I got this cool Raging Bull shirt. I have another positive about the queue line now, and don't worry, we'll get into the good things about the ride experience soon, but you spend much more time in the queue than on the ride, so I feel like this is important. Chicago sees a lot of extreme weather, crazy snow in the winter, but also some crazy heat in the summer. I loved how Maxx Force had 4 or 5 of these massive cooling fans blowing air and mist to help keep people cool. Another thing that makes Maxx Force so great are those trains, from both a visual and comfort standpoint. Just looking at them, you can tell the ride is supposed to have a loose racing theme. The trains are probably the only themed aspect of the ride, but they still do look cool. They're also some of the most comfortable trains I've ever had the luxury of sitting in. The restraint system is very minimal, and they lock in place, so you don't have to worry about holding the restraint up or getting stabled. Now there are shin guards, but they don't really touch your legs at all. You will not notice them even if you have big legs like me. The feeling of freedom that I felt was comparable to how I felt on Top Thrill Dragster, and also like Dragster, the sides of the trains on Maxx Force are completely open. You feel completely and entirely exposed, at the same time like you have no control. And now finally, we will get into the positives that relate to the ride experience. I said earlier that there isn't any theming on the launch, but that does create a positive. That is that at least for the first few times that you ride, you have absolutely no idea when you're going to launch. You're just sitting there for what feels like forever, wondering if you're ever even going to go, and then just takes off. No warning, 0 to 78 miles per hour in 1.8 seconds. Statistically, that was one of the most powerful launches in the world, and definitely feels like it too. Easily the most powerful launch I've experienced. It literally uses some of the same technology to launch rockets into outer space. Then after the launch, you dive straight into a train trestle that serves as an amazing head chopper. But what it also does, because there's no lights under there, you go straight from completely bright outside, straight into complete darkness, and back into the light, which completely disorients the rider. Your eyes have no idea what's going on, then you pull up into the dog tongue element, which pulls some crazy G's. I wish I had measured the G-force because that pull up is just so tight. Then when you're in the dog tongue, it kind of just hangs you half upside down for a few seconds, so you get some crazy sideways hang time while looking at the ground from 175 feet up, and if you look around you also get a great view of the park. Then you dive back down, pulling some more crazy G's on a crazy tight pullout, and that combined with the track cross under head chopper actually makes this one of my favorite parts of the ride, surprisingly enough. Although actually now that I think about it, I have trouble deciphering which elements are my favorite, because how they all deliver in their own way. After diving down, you have a 0G roll, which is one of the whippiest inversions on the planet. Then you go up into a double inversion that has a pretty cool element, and because of the early brakes, if you're sitting in the back row, you could slow down while you're upside down, providing even more awesome hang time. And then when you come down, you realize that those brakes were completely necessary, seeing how short the brake run is, and how they need to be able to safely run 2 trains at once. And overall, I think that the fact that it's a short ride is very easily made up for by the fact that it's pedal to the metal for the entire thing, never letting up, and every element other than the speed hill delivers. Another major positive is how this is a very unique experience. There are only 2 air launch coasters in the Western Hemisphere, and only one of them was originally designed to be an air launch, Maxx Force. There are 2 elements that you can only find on one ride in the world, Maxx Force, and it might honestly be the smoothest roller coaster I have ever ridden. Overall, Maxx Force is quite possibly the most underrated roller coaster that I've experienced. Despite its short length, I still easily give it a 10 out of 10 and the title of best coaster at Six Flags Great America. And that's not even a knock on Goliath. Goliath is insanely underrated too. But out of the 80 coasters I've ridden, I rank Maxx Force as the 3rd best one, with only Millennium Force and Steel Ventures ahead of it. So that's about going to wrap up this video, and it's time for today's shoutouts. Those would be going to Coaster Cloud, X-Coaster Enthusiast, and Millennium Force Man. All 3 of them correctly answered last video's trivia question about how many operating and parallel Valeras there are in the world, so congrats! Anyways, I hope you all have a great day. Remember, leave your suggestions, thoughts, and video ideas in the comments below, and I'll catch you guys later. See ya!